I think my success today was that I spent a solid 6-7 years in the corporate grind, enough to get really well schooled in how it all works.
Do you think that's a necessary part in a young, ambitious person's career, that junior corporate grind where you're putting your head down for 3-4 years and just working?
I'd like to say no, but I think probably yeah.
You're working on a seemingly small project in Lake Tahoe, 40,000 people, but you've raised a lot of money. You've done a lot of projects. How much money have you raised exactly, public and private?
Yeah, about $25 million of private funding, and we've helped secure over $120 million of public funding.
Wow.
I never thought I would be the CEO of a nonprofit, but when I look back on all those experiences, they kind of all added up to be perfect for a startup nonprofit in the environmental space. And I fell in love with the mission right away. I got it. And I had a vision so clearly in my head of what this organization could be.
It's another beautiful day here in Lake Tahoe on June 24th, 2024. Today's guest is Amy Berry, CEO of the Tahoe Fund. The Tahoe Fund is a nonprofit organization focused on the environmental restoration of the Lake Tahoe with the goal of benefiting the lives of its 40,000 residents and the 15 million visitors the lake attracts almost every year. Amy and her team have raised over $100 million to fund the 160 plus projects that they work on in their mission to build a more sustainable future for Tahoe and surrounding landscape. Amy, welcome to Tahoe Minds.
Nick, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Let's get started by discussing your early career. Working in advertising, you worked at Ogilvy for a little bit, some energy companies, mostly in marketing though.
Yeah, I graduated college on the East Coast and moved straight to New York City with a whole bunch of friends and got right into the advertising business, which to me was kind of like the solution between not really having a job and having to get a job. I thought I was going to go to the Caribbean and teach sailing, and my dad would pull his short pockets out and show me the lint that was left from paying tuition, and he's like, I don't think so. So advertising to me seemed like a great way to be in the creative world, which I love creativity, and still be in the working world, the business world. And it was great. I worked at a firm called Saatchi & Saatchi first. I was in the management training program there and worked on kids cereal, sold chocolate to kids for breakfast with Cocoa Puffs and Cookie Crisp. And then really got a great background with General Mills and some Pepsi AC in Atlanta. So I was 22 sitting in focus groups with old people talking about heartburn, but learned a ton about the fundamentals of marketing. And then from there shifted to Ogilvy and worked on IBM's global advertising, which I really liked. I found that while I appreciated Lucky the Leprechaun and Sonny the Cuckoo Bird, business to business was more my speed. So, and got to do a lot of global travel and global advertising, which was really fun.
Awesome. And did that find you, or did you pursue it?
I pursued it. Yeah, it's probably bad to put in a podcast, but I sat in a meeting at General Mills with all these MBAs in the room, and for about an hour they debated if Sonny the Cuckoo Bird is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs or if he goes cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And I pretty much went cuckoo, and I was like, I gotta get out of here. So I went to a headhunting firm and they found me a position at Ogilvy.
I see. And so you're originally from the East Coast. You went to Brown for your undergrad. What brought you to Tahoe? Why did you decide to come here? How did you find this little pocket?
Have you seen this place? So I met a guy in college whose family had a place out here. So I came out here for the first time in college and just fell absolutely in love with it. We ended up getting married, and we were living in New York City, kind of doing that junior corporate grind. And we came to vacation, and then we flew back to Newark, which isn't the nicest airport. We got in a really stinky cab. We got to our 4th floor walk-up that we spent way too much money on. And we said, man, it'd be so cool to live in Tahoe one day, but people don't live in Tahoe. We just thought of it as a vacation place. And sure enough, he found a job out here. And so in 2003, we ditched to New York City and came to Tahoe.
Awesome. And do you think, you touched briefly on the junior corporate grind, do you think that's a necessary part or step in a young, ambitious person's career? That junior corporate grind where you're, putting your head down for 3-4 years and just, working a lot?
I'd like to say no, but I think probably yeah. I think my success today was that I spent a solid 6-7 years in the corporate grind, enough to get really well schooled in how it all works. I got an amazing education in business and marketing at Ogilvy and Saatchi. And then I learned, like, this is just not a healthy life balance. So I think you put your time in, you find what you like to do, you figure out what you don't like to do. And then once you've got that really strong foundation, you can go do anything.
Yeah. And what other career choices, that was a pretty major career choice to, be in New York City and, in that corporate grind. What other career choices do you think you made to end up in the position where you are now as CEO of the Tahoe Fund?
I always say it's just kind of crazy that I ended up in this position. And when I look back, I realize everything I did led up to being in the perfect role for me. But so we moved to Tahoe. And then I went to work for a small marketing firm in Tahoe, which was in Reno, actually, which was great because all the solutions in New York were usually solved by writing big checks, right? IBM's global advertising budget was almost $1 billion. So we could solve a lot by throwing money at it. When I worked for the smaller firm in Reno, we worked with small business and they didn't have big budgets. And if the budget was $250, they meant $250. And if you didn't spend $5, they wanted it back. So you had to be a lot more resourceful and learn how to solve things when money wasn't the answer, which was great for ending up at a nonprofit startup for sure. And I did that for a while. And then I just ended up at a governor's appreciation dinner, standing in the line for valet, and I struck up a conversation with a guy who had just won an award for their new wind startup. And I had been thinking for a while that I wanted to get into renewable energy. Being in the tech marketing world in the late 90s, early 2000s was a cool kind of period. There were crash and burns at .com and .bust, but I felt like renewable energy had that sort of same vibe and energy. So I said, hey, what's happening? And he said, oh, well, we're hiring. And I went online when I got home, and sure enough, they were hiring, I think, director of marketing. And it was one of those opportunities where you see a job description, you're like, I actually can do all of this. I know how to do this. Like, I think I might be a pretty good candidate for that. So I ended up applying, and then I went to work for this little wind startup it was called Mariah Power. When I was there, we actually rebranded it Windspire. They made these cool vertical access wind turbines. And that was my first real startup experience. And it was insane. I mean, it was long hours and crazy, and the product was super cool and huge success on the PR front. I had never done PR before. I'd done marketing and advertising, but we were able to get a feature on 2020. We were on, in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NPR, kind of everywhere. And I grew to really like it. I have a very competitive spirit, and I feel like when you pitch a story to a reporter and they're like, yes, and then you end up on the news, it's like, yes, we won that one. Feels like scoring a goal. So that was great. I did that for a little while and then ended up meeting a really large energy company, Spanish energy company headquartered in Chicago for North America. Actually through Twitter, believe it or not. And we organized a tweet up, which was something you did 15 years ago. And so at the Wind Power Conference, we had the small wind people and the large wind people all meet up for a tweet up, which is where you actually meet the people that you're tweeting at or with. I know it sounds so goofy now, but so I struck a great conversation with their head of marketing, and he ended up going to Spain, and he reached out and said, hey, my position's open. You should check it out. And I'd been in Tahoe for about 10 years, and I absolutely loved it here. But from a career standpoint, I just felt like I was ready to do something big again. And jumping into a management role at this big energy company in North America was perfect for that. So I ended up taking on director of marketing communications. So ran all of the external communications, internal communications, a ton of community relations work, like fly to all these random little podunk towns to try to get wind farms put in or solar farms. And it was really exciting work. It was great. The only downfall was that I lived here. My office was in Chicago. We had projects all over the US and Canada, and headquarters were in Spain. So I was on an airplane every week. And I just started to get PTSD when you walk onto the jetway and you smell that recycled air. And my daughter was really little, and she would say, Mom, why are you leaving again? And I'm like, I don't know. So I was doing that. I was loving the work, but I was not loving being away from Tahoe, being away from my daughter. And a friend had just helped the nonprofit Tahoe Fund get started. And she reached out. I'll never forget. I was sitting in my office in Chicago. It was right on the Chicago River. It was so cold that steam was coming off the river that day. And I got a Skype message. This is how long ago it was. And she said, hey, I'm helping this amazing group of people start a nonprofit, and they're going to hire their first full-time employee, their CEO. You should check it out. And I was like, well, I love the idea of helping Tahoe, but I have no idea how to run a nonprofit, but send me the info. And also I have no experience running a nonprofit, so I don't know why they would choose me. She sent me their brand new website. I read pretty much every word of it, and I fell in love with the mission right away. It was just, I got it. And I had a vision like so clearly in my head of what this organization could be. And the thing that really drew me was the board of directors, just a really impressive group of people. So I put my cover letter together, I got my resume together and pitched it. And it took almost a year. And then I went through multiple rounds of interviews, and then they finally hired me. So that was a little over 12 years ago.
So you first started, or not first, but you were working at a wind energy startup, and then you transitioned to a bigger energy company in a management role.
Yeah.
What do you think the biggest difference between those two, a huge company, a huge energy company versus a tiny energy company is? And how do you think that helped you throughout the interview process and to, eventually become the CEO of Tahoe Fund?
Yeah, well, I think it's a startup, right? You're really scrappy, you're bootstrapping it, you're trying to figure out how to get outsized attention for your little company. You're trying to make yourself look bigger than you are, more professional than you are, so that you can, sell lots of product. The big energy company, they're a huge 9 billion euro company, Acciona it's called. In Spain, they're massive. In North America, they're pretty small. So it was, they have much larger resources available, much larger company, much more professional. And this was more about, rather than creating a name for a company, it was more about protecting a reputation, and it's publicly traded in Spain. And there's a lot of rules, I'd say kind of fence posts, guardrails, you got to stay inside, and a huge bureaucracy as well. When they hired me, I said, I really need a Mac because I can't do all this creative work on a PC. And I found out later that out of a company of like over 30,000 people, I was the only person in the whole company who had a Mac. And that was like, everyone in Spain knew me because I was the one who made them get a Mac. It was exciting because the projects were huge and the impact was going to be that much bigger. I mean, the small wind turbines were great because they were very much on a local, you'd put it in your business, you put it in your backyard. We were building 250 megawatt wind farms. They were going to take the equivalent of thousands of cars off the road, powering millions of homes. So it was just a much larger scale. But the environmental permitting for those projects was really intense. And I think that part was really helpful with Tahoe because getting anything done here is pretty intense on the environmental permitting. So it was sort of like having a marketing background from New York and even in Reno, and then wind energy, understanding what got people at the consumer level really excited about sustainability. And then the big idea of like, how do you sustain a big corporation and really protect a reputation, and convince neighborhoods that they really want a wind farm. Where in Oklahoma, we would put up a wind farm and no one would even talk to us. They're like, great. And then in upstate New York, I got accused of all sorts of things for trying to put a wind farm up. So it's just kind of like, I never thought I would be the CEO of a nonprofit, but when I look back on all those experiences, they kind of all added up to be perfect for a startup nonprofit in the environmental space. I
totally agree. I think that your career trajectory has been pretty much perfect for where you are right now.
Very unexpectedly, I would say.
Yeah. And you're working on a seemingly small project in Lake Tahoe, 40,000 people, but you've raised a lot of money. You've done a lot of projects, and when you take into account the 15 million people that visit here every year, it's much bigger than it seems. First, I just want to ask, how much money have you raised exactly, public and private?
Yeah, so we've raised about $25 million of private funding, and we've helped secure over $120 million of public funding.
Wow, so over 145 together.
And we've got some news coming out in the next couple weeks, so we'll be close to 150, maybe 160 pretty soon.
Very impressive. And how do you go about raising money, and what does it look like, public versus private?
Yeah, well, The private sector, it's just about, really harnessing the passion that so many people have for Tahoe. We're so lucky that there are so many people that live here that are incredibly generous, and they love this place. And so our job at the Tahoe Fund, it's not just me, we have a great team and an amazing board, is to find projects that are really going to make a difference for Tahoe, that people who live here are going to appreciate helping get done. It's much more, sometimes it's a little bit from the brain, the head, but it's mostly from the heart. You find something that people are going to absolutely fall in love with. And then it's the leverage of the public funding. That's really the part that makes it so impactful. If you can say to a donor, hey, if we raise $1 million for this, we're going to get $12.5 million from the federal government, they're on board. They're like, great, I already pay enough in taxes. I'd like to see some of that money come back to this place that I love. And then we work with more than 50 partners. And the partners do so much amazing work to improve Lake Tahoe. And so they will come to us and say, the East Shore Trail is a great example. I know you're out there running and biking and on it a lot. The Public Transportation District came to us and said, hey, we've got plans to build this incredible path from Incline to Sand Harbor. It's going to have huge safety improvements on the road. It's going to remove all the cars off the road, all the people off the road. We're going to put in a ton of water quality improvements. And then we're going to have this spectacular path. We've lined up a $12.5 million grant. We need $500,000 to secure it. But the path was only one part of a whole corridor plan. So they had already committed, $30 million from other partners for redoing the curbs and gutters on the side of the road and putting stormwater management in and putting parking lots in. It was a really expensive project across like 8 miles. So they said, we don't have a partner that can come up with the $500,000. And we were only a couple years old at the time, and we thought, well, it's in Incline Village where there's so much capacity to give and so many people who love Tahoe. It's going to be the most spectacular bike path in the world. And there's a $12.5 million federal grant on the line. If we can't raise $500,000 for this, great, we're done. We will close up shop and go home because this is a model that's not going to work here. So we launched a campaign. We created different Vista points that donors could sponsor and put their names on. We had a whole calculator of how many Vista points, what price point, how do we get to 500? And then we met with state parks, and they were a little hesitant because they were worried that they were going to adopt this beautiful trail and not have the resources to maintain it. So we ended up launching our campaign for $750,000 so that we could have $500 for the construction match and $250 for maintenance of the trail for state parks. We put it in a long-term investment fund, and we launched a campaign in 2014, and in 6 weeks we raised $1 million. So we sold all the Vista points, we sold benches, we decided to have bears that would go in the ground with your name on it, so we had bear crossings. Then we said we'll have trout that go on bridges, and we just made all this stuff up. We didn't actually know what any of it looked like. We had some drawings. And the community was on board right away. It's just like, this community is incredible. They're amazing. And at the time, we didn't have a path. We just had drawings of what it would look like. And I was dragging people out in Manzanita in 80-degree weather. And they're like, okay, fine, what do you want? And I felt like a real estate agent. I was like, do you want mountainside or lakeside? Do you want north view or south view? But it was a really incredible example of this community. They're just amazing. And so we raised the $500,000, that secured the $12.5 million grant, which then secured all the rest of the public funding for that project. And then today we just kept selling bears and trout. And the most important part was we didn't want it to be one of those projects where you had to have $50,000 to be a part of it. So from the start, we said, all you have to do is donate $100 and your name will go on a donor wall. Nice. So when we launched it...
Sorry, really quick, the donor wall is the trout and the bears?
No, the donor wall is at the very beginning of the trail. You might not see it from where you live. There are rows and rows and rows of names, over 700 names on the first donor wall. And when we opened the trail 5 years ago this week, believe it or not, everybody saw the donor wall and they're like, I want my name on there. So a couple years ago, we ended up putting up a second donor wall. And we now have $1 million in the maintenance account for the project. And when we opened the trail, we had so much money in the maintenance fund, we went to state parks and said, we'd really like to extend this. And we're selling all these bears and trout and donor wall names. Like, wouldn't it be great? We now have, at the time we had $700,000 for the maintenance, which was way more than we ever thought. Can we shift the restricted funds to the next sections of this path? And they said, absolutely. So now we have $1 million in the maintenance fund and $2 million for the next phase.
Wow.
Which is pretty awesome.
And what does that next phase look like? What are the plans?
It's pretty cool. It's going to go from Sand Harbor, where the trail ends now, all the way to Spooner Summit, so another 8 miles down. They're starting with parking lots, so Chimney Beach is already underway. The Forest Service is doing that. They're going to extend it. It's going to have 120 spots, 130 spots. Across the way is Secret Harbor. They're going to end up with like 120, 130 spots there. All the way at the end, across from Spooner Lake State Park, is going to be 250 new parking spots. And the goal is to remove all that dangerous parking on the side of the road, put it in the parking lots, and then run public transportation. And then they'll build the path. The first section of the path is going to go from Thunderbird Cove to Secret Harbor parking lot. And we are waiting for really good news for a $24 million grant from Sand Harbor to Thunderbird Cove. And the Tahoe Fund has already committed $2 million. And we're hoping that by saying we're in for $2 million right away, that helps leverage and secure the rest of the public funding that's needed for the project. So.
Gotcha. And is there usually like a ratio of private to federal that you can try to match with most of the projects, $1 private for $12?
It totally changes. It just depends on what public grants are available. So public funding just gets more and more competitive every year. And if you can show up with private funding, you're going to make your project and your grant application that much more competitive. And it just depends what source the grant comes from. So sometimes it's 1-to-1, sometimes it's 1-to-10. It really just depends on the project.
And so for the East Shore Trail, you said that people came to you already having government funding if you were able to raise the private funding. Does it usually work like that? The public funding is readily available to you if you raise the private, or if you raise the private, then you get the
It's a combination for sure. Okay. So for instance, they came to us with the East Shore Trail and they said, we have this, we need a match. Down in South Lake Tahoe, the Upper Truckee River is the most impaired watershed in the basin. They built an airport in the middle of it back in the 60s. I don't know about you, but most airport runways are straight that I've seen, but rivers are not supposed to be straight. They're supposed to meander. So it's about 8 or 9 miles of river that really got, I don't know, destroyed is probably a little too strong, but bad things and not, good things were not happening. And what happens when you straighten a river is you increase the velocity that the water runs through it. So then it ends up grabbing all the edges of the riverbank and dumping it into the river, which then flows quickly into the lake. And with that sediment, we know sediment is one of the reasons we're losing lake clarity, but it also drags with it toxins like nitrogen and phosphorus, which then when it hits the water warms up, we start to see algae and algal blooms. So a big effort underway across the whole basin is to reduce the amount of water, fine sediment flowing into the lake, and marshes are great for that. They are natural filtration systems, but when you when you take a meandering river and straighten it, or you start grazing cattle in it, or you build a giant motel in the middle of it, you kind of mess that whole system up. So in 2017, Tahoe Conservancy and the Tahoe Resource Conservation District came to us and said, we have the opportunity to buy a 200-acre meadow within that wetlands called Johnson Meadow. The family came to us actually and said, we think we're ready to sell this. Can you help us? And we said, yeah, this is so critical. We put in the first $100,000. We went to Barton Health, we went to Heavenly, and we said, can you guys support us? They each gave us $50,000. So we were actually the first funds in on that. Then when the state applied for their public grants, every time they applied for a grant and asked for $5 million from one entity or $5 million from another, they could say, we have $100,000 from the private community. So there's like a checkpoint scoring system on that grant, and they rated it 10 out of 10 on private match. So then they were able to secure that. And then just this spring, we helped the Conservancy buy across the street the old former Motel 6 property, which is literally paving over paradise and putting up a parking lot and an old motel and a restaurant. And when you see the visuals, they just shot some beautiful drone footage of it. And it's literally like this big, beautiful green meadow with a giant development in the middle. So with that one, they came to us and said, we're going to try to do this. And we said, all right, we're in for $100,000 right away. And then there was a moment in time when they were trying to get the transaction done where they weren't sure they had enough money to buy it. And we got really creative. Luckily, we have some realtors on our board and some real estate lawyers on our board. And we actually reached out to League to Save Lake Tahoe, and we said, we think we might need to raise $5 million to make this acquisition happen. And it was a great partnership, and we were kind of all geared up, ready to go. And the best thing ever happened. They didn't need our money. We didn't have to go raise $5 million. They were able to get it for 15.4, and now it's in public hands, and we just launched a campaign to help actually raise the money to tear it down.
Awesome. So how do you usually go about finding the root causes or the biggest causes of Lake Tahoe's problems? Do people usually come to you, or do you seek them out yourself, or how does that work? Are you mostly fundraising, or do you also go in?
That's a great question. So 5 years, so when we first got started, the goal of the Tahoe Fund, raise private funds to help get environmental improvement projects done. But it's such a huge scope that when the first iteration of the fund even predates me, was we're going to fund conservation projects, recreation projects, and education projects. And then we started to get a little more involved in things, and we're like, wow, we can't ignore the forest. So we added forest health, and you really can't ignore transportation. So we added transportation, but we were very reactive. So we were like, hey, tell us what projects you need money for. We'll review them, and if we think they're a great fit for private funding, then we'll go raise the money. We'll try to get you the money for it. In 2019, we redid our strategic plan, and that's when we got much more intentional behind each of those 5 focus areas. And we worked with the board, and we said, okay, for forest health, we don't want to just do a forest health project. Like, what is the key issue with forest health, and what's the role that the Tahoe Fund should play there? So when it came to forest health, we realized we're just not fixing the forest fast enough. So we said our focus is to help our public agency partners increase the pace and scale of restoring the forest. And then once you get into that, what we realized is the big issue is we have too many trees in the forest. We actually funded some software, and they were able to tell us that we have 22 million too many trees in Tahoe alone. You know, back in the day, you always hear in school, you learn about the Donner Party, and they rode wagons through the forest. Now you look at the forest, you can't even ride a bike through the forest. So we just have too many trees. The density is too much, which means trees are fighting for limited resources. Then you have years of drought, then bark beetles come, and you end up with a forest that's dying. So our focus became, all right, how do we increase the pace and scale of thinning these forests, of removing the dead trees, so that we can help prevent catastrophic wildfire?
And what is that? What is removal of tree look like?
Well, it's done in a really scientific way. Permitting. We're not talking about clear cutting. We don't want to clear cut the forest, but we need to reduce some of the trees to give the big healthy trees more sunlight, more water, more opportunity to survive. And one of the issues we ran into right away was there's not a lot of value in the wood in our forests. Like in Portland, or up in Oregon and Washington, they have these big hardy trees, and they chop them down and sell them, and they're worth a lot of money. In Tahoe, we don't want to take down the big healthy trees. That's what we want to stay. It's the thinner, littler, softer wood trees that we need to remove, and then the brush that grows underneath. So there isn't a lot of value. So we've been spending a lot of time figuring out how do we create markets for that wood so that there is some sort of a value to it, so that there's more impetus to actually get the wood out of the forest. Because if we don't get the wood out, it's all going to burn up. I'm really nervous for this summer. I think it's going to be a bad fire year, not just in Tahoe, but I think California and Nevada. It's just, we see a huge winter, and then it's usually a hangover a couple years later, and all the undergrowth grows really strong, trees are still dying, and then it gets really hot and dry. It's a bad recipe. So in that front, we started a philanthropic venture capital fund called the Smartest Forest Fund, and it is venture cap style funding, sometimes investments, mostly grants, early seed money, state, like seed funding, not even, A round or anything like that. And the idea is, can we seed ideas, technology, pilot projects to de-risk the ideas so that our public agency partners can adopt it eventually? And so, great example, we had a pilot up here about a month ago of this remote masticator called the BurnBot. They actually have 2 machines. One is a prescribed fire robot, and one is a remote masticator. And the issue right now is if you want to go clean up the forest floor to prevent wildfire, you've got to get a machine on there. But the machines usually have a man or a woman inside, somebody driving it, so it makes it really top heavy. So you can't put it on steep slopes because it could topple over. So what they've done is they've taken the top off and made it flat so it can go on 40 to 60% slopes with somebody next door, standing 10 feet away operating it, and it mows down everything, it chops it up, puts it back in the soil. It can take down up to 9-inch trees, and it can do it on really steep slopes where you can't put hand crews up there because you can't put somebody with a chainsaw on a really steep slope. It's so dangerous. You're just asking for something bad to happen. And the other thing that's incredible about it is they did 22 acres in 3 days. That would take a hand crew over 2 weeks to do. And so we got some private funding together thanks to the Martis Fund and Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation, Tahoe Fund. We partnered together. We got the money together, and then we were able to go to our federal partners. They got some money together, and then we did this 22-acre pilot, and we invited everyone in the forestry world to come and see it, because seeing is believing, right? It sounds kind of crazy. You get out there, we had 75 people for the day, and everyone's like, this is absolutely incredible. Yeah. How can we not use this technology to help us get more done more quickly? And you worry, like, are we taking people's jobs away? But this is not work that hand crews can really do efficiently. And if they're doing this work, they're not out fighting fires. And hand crews want to go fight fires, right? They don't want to be chopping down trees and bushes. So it actually works great. And we don't have enough people to do the work. So we've been really focused in the workforce space as well. We've been funding scholarships for a new forestry program at Lake Tahoe Community College. And just trying to understand how do we get the people to do the work? How do we infuse technology so it's more efficient and happens more quickly? And then what do we do with the wood? So we were really excited. We helped partner on a new sawmill in Carson City. We did a report to understand. It's easy to say, like, there's a lot of wood in the forest, but when you're about to make an investment, you really need to know how much wood and what does that pencil out to when you do your ROI. And we did a study that showed that we have like 20 plus years of wood that could go to a sawmill or go to a biomass plant. And somebody on our board who's an investor with a family office saw it, and he sent it to them and said, hey, you guys, there's an opportunity to make some money and help the forest here. And they decided to start a new sawmill, the first new sawmill in over 100 years in Tahoe. And they came to us and said, can you help us find a place to put the sawmill? And my former board chair, Alan Biaggi, and I went and had lunch with the Washoe tribe of California and Nevada. And we pitched them on hosting a sawmill, and they loved it because they have so much land, and that's what they needed. And for the Washoe tribe, the most important mission for them is saving the forests, Mother Earth. So it was a really great partnership, and we connected them, and 2 years later, there is now a fully up and running sawmill in Carson City. Wow. And it's only 10 miles from the basin, which is huge, because one of the things that really hampers forest thinning treatments is the expense of, you can chop the trees down, right? But then you got to get them out of the forest. And before that sawmill, there was really nowhere close to take them. So the transportation cost to get them from the forest to the mill or to the biomass facility was so expensive that contractors were not bidding on the projects. So now it's only 10 miles away, which means they can go back and forth to Carson City multiple trips a day. And it's awesome.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about the forestry and forest conservation. What does the resource allocation look like for those 5 pillars of saving time? Is it a lot of it in forest, or is it pretty evenly spread out? Great question.
So we have 5 focus areas, and then we made the decision when we did our strategic plan that we needed one that was our highest priority, and forest health just became it. You can hear me. I could talk for 10 hours about forest health. There's so much going on in that space, but if we allow this forest to burn down, nothing else matters. You don't have to worry about lake clarity because it's going to be destroyed. There won't be trails in the forest because the forest will be destroyed. No one will be visiting, so you don't have to worry about transportation. I mean, it'll have a huge detrimental effect, and we have a $5 billion economy here. So not to mention loss of the economy, loss of homes, loss of lives possibly. So forest health is number 1. Then everything else is kind of equal, but I will say we tend to do much more in the sustainable recreation space because that's really the balance between the human environment and the natural environment. And we end up funding a lot of trail work because people love trails. They love to fund things that they're going to use. So we end up doing a lot in that space as well.
Yeah. So on that note, I want to transition back to the East Shore Trail, which got the nickname the Impossible Trail for alluding to the difficulty of getting that project completed. Can you talk about that story a little bit?
Sure. So people are blown away by this fact, but the very first line drawn on a map to say we should build a path here was in 1987. And we did our fundraising campaign in 2014. Construction began in 16. We opened the trail in 2019. And we nicknamed it the Impossible Trail because everybody told everyone for years, it is impossible. You will never get that trail built. And thanks to a lot of public funding and 14 different agency partners that worked on it. And then now over 1,000 donors, the trail happened and it actually came to life. So.
And what were the biggest challenges? Why was it so impossible before you guys completed it?
Governor Sandoval was in office at the time when we did the groundbreaking, and he said, this is the kind of thing that you just can't imagine is ever possible, that it would ever be here. Because at the time, there's a highway and then a sliver of land, and it was all manzanita bushes and sagebrush, and that had been developed when they built the railroad from Sand Harbor to the lumber yard here at Tunnel Creek. They just took what was ever in the way and dumped it over the side. And it just didn't seem feasible that you would come up with the amount of money that was required to do it and that you could engineer it in a way that would be feasible. But everybody, Karen Mullen really gets a lot of credit for all of this. She might have been the first person to draw that line on the map, and just very dog-headed to say, nope, let's find the funding, let's believe in it, let's do this. We see the impacts that it can have. And everybody working together, it was a lot of work. NDOT stepped up to actually be the project manager. They built it. They put a lot of funding in. Washoe County put money in. The state of Nevada put money in. The Forest Service put money in. I mean, it was a big collective effort.
Yeah, and I'm sure that there's a lot of locals and tourists on it, every day, every week. Did you guys expect that it was going to be this big of a success when you were in that planning stage?
I think so, because what a lot of people forget is that the East Shore was super popular. There was just no safe way to get to it. So if you close your eyes and imagine what it was like to drive from Incline to Sand Harbor before the trail was open, you could park anywhere as long as your tire was on the right side of the white line. And so there were cars parked the whole way, and not just cars, but people would get out of their cars with their cooler and their kids and their floaties and their dogs, and it was frightening to drive around the bend and head down to Carson City. And so we knew that people really wanted access to that East Shore, but it was very limited and really unsafe. So the idea of replacing all of that parking with proper parking lots and then giving people dedicated access, we had a feeling it was going to be really popular. We estimated 100,000 people a year would use it. The trail counters out there are closer to 200,000. The part that's the most surprising, I don't know if it's surprising, but the most delightful to me is the diversity of people that are out there using it. I mean, most trails in Tahoe, you see the same very healthy, I'll just say it, the white, healthy, affluent folks are out hiking. And on this trail, you see all age range, all ability. I've seen every different race and ethnicity.
Yeah, I think every time I go out there, I hear at least 3 different languages spoken.
Exactly.
Every single time I go out there.
Yeah, and it's really exciting. I think the reason is it's a very inviting, inclusive trail. We have parking, we have signage, we have interpretive signs, we have maps on kiosks, we have garbage cans, we have restrooms. It's really inviting people out to enjoy it. And we replaced like 1,000 cars that used to park on the road with parking lots. Obviously, we can't build 1,000 parking spots, but there's paid parking, which people love and hate. But the idea behind the paid parking was it will keep the parking rotated around so people won't park all day, and then limits the number of people that can be out there. And I always say this, the first time I went out and stood on that bridge, which is the longest bridge in Lake Tahoe, 810 feet long, it really changed me. And I've spend every day outside here, but I can't imagine that people go out on that trail and they don't change and they don't want to be fans of Tahoe and fans of the environment and take better care of it.
So true. I totally agree. So that's just one of the 160 projects that you guys have funded. So what have been your favorite, and what do you think have been the most beneficial in terms of bang for buck?
I love and hate this question. It's kind of like if I asked your mom who her favorite kid was. It's really hard to answer that question.
Yeah.
So many great projects. I mean, obviously that project just so transformational. Everything that we're doing on the Upper Truckee River, I think, gets it there. Johnson Meadow, and then helping the Conservancy acquire Motel 6. I mean, that's been on people's list for 25 years. And to see that when we finally raise the money and tear that building down and restore that wetlands back, that's going to feel awesome. And sometimes it's really small projects too. More bite size. One of my favorites is down at Taylor Creek. the salmon spawn every fall. And when they spawn, the bears come to eat the salmon. And the people come to see because this little creek turns orange with all the salmon. And then there's bears. And they used to have this crummy old boardwalk that would flood when the creek came up. And people were standing pretty much in the creek. And then smart humans that we have, they would get in the creek to take selfies with bears. And the Forest Service is like, this is insane, we're shutting this down. And we were like, can we come up with a solution? So we worked together. Their engineer said, we've always wanted to raise that boardwalk and put a overlook, and it would have railings. And so we got a $25,000 match from Clean Up the Lake. And we were able to raise the rest from great donors, and we built this beautiful overlook. So now people can still be there. The salmon are spawning, the bears are there, but no one's in the river taking selfies. So that's a good one.
Are there any projects that you guys have done that are hard to raise money for because they seem a little out there or not? It doesn't seem like you guys would make tangible progress, but it would actually be very helpful if you were able to get that project completed.
Yeah, actually this happens all the time. So we're really lucky. In the nonprofit sector, there's two colors of money. There's unrestricted and restricted. So restricted is, we want to build this beautiful path, give us $1 and we'll put it directly to that path. So that's called restricted funding. So we do a lot of campaigns, restricted funding. And then we have this wonderful program called Stewardship Circle, which is a multi-year giving campaign of unrestricted funds. And then we're able to collect all those unrestricted funds and then have basically a bucket of funding for projects that might not be as sexy, that are really important, that don't have a campaign. So for example, one of the most popular things now is a microtransit solution. So the TART Connect, you can open your app, it's like Uber, it'll come to your house and pick you up and it'll take you exactly where you want to go. I don't think if we did a campaign for that, people would be raising their hands, but we were able to take some money from our Stewardship Circle bucket and help make sure that that project happened again this year.
Yeah, and you touched on this briefly several conversations ago, but do you guys collaborate a lot with other philanthropic organizations around the lake?
Yeah, we collaborate with everybody, actually. That's really our core principle. So our focus when we first got started was to help raise money to get projects done. And the second one was to build a culture of collaboration in the basin. So all of our board members sign a statement of collaboration when they come on the board. And you actually won't find a Tahoe Fund project that is only ours. Every single project we do has a partner involved, which multiplies our impact. It's hard to collaborate. It's so much easier, like, what is that old saying? Like, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go long, go together. Everything we do is a partnership. So we collaborate with different community foundations, with other foundations as well. And then we partner with over 50 different organizations that are on the ground doing all the great work.
You mentioned the Stewardship Circle and a lot of these donors that contribute a lot to these projects that go around along the lake. How can people that don't have the funds or younger people contribute to the betterment of the Lake Tahoe
great
area?
question. Well, I think you don't have to have $50,000 to be involved in the Tahoe Fund. We're happy to have $25, $50, $100. I mean, those really add up to make a huge difference. We ran this great campaign for Nevada Nordic this winter where so many people go up and use these cross-country trails that are totally free to the public. And these local people in Tahoe were like, this is great. We need to have a groomer up there. We can create this awesome opportunity for everybody. So usually we do matching campaigns where we say, if you give us $1, we'll match it for $1. Well, this one we said, if we can get 100 people to donate $25 or more, then we will give $10,000 to Nevada Nordic. And we ended up with 300 donors, and we raised $30,000 or $50,000. Wow. And some of that were a couple big checks, but it was just a lot of people giving $50, $100. So if you don't think that's a lot, you have to think about the multiplier effect. And actually where the multiplier effect we see the most is we have a $1 for Tahoe program. So we have businesses all over the lake that add $1 onto at the end of a meal, or if you go skiing at Mount Rose, or you're skiing at North Star, Heavenly, Palisades, Homewood, there's $1 that gets added on. $1 is not a lot of money, right? In the last 10 years, we've raised over $1 million from those dollar donations.
Wow, that's incredible.
It's awesome. So I think get into the habit of being philanthropic. Give $25. It should feel really, really good. And then later in life, if you have more money, you can add zeros to those checks. But I think just knowing that even a small amount is going to make a huge difference because all the small amounts collectively add up. The other thing is just get involved, like find out what you're interested in. You know, Tahoe Fund is not a huge volunteer organization, but we partner with a lot of volunteer organizations. So we will raise the money, right, for a new trail. Like we're helping build a new single track trail at Tunnel Creek. So we've raised the money that helps secure the public funding, that same story over again, to build a single track from the Flume Trail down past Monkey Rock to get the bikers and hikers off of that same road. And the trail will be awesome because people won't go over their handlebars and the bikes won't run into the hikers. But we need help building it. So we partnered with TAMBA, Tahoe Area Mountain Bike Association. They're gonna help build it and they're gonna do volunteer days out there. So if you ride trails and you love trails, you should commit to like one day of trail work a year. And if enough people commit to that one day of trail work a year, it's gonna add up and we're gonna get a lot done.
Yeah, and how do you get this message out? Do you usually organize events, fundraising events, and then talk to everybody that comes to these events? And
yeah,
how does that work?
It's back to my marketing background. Selling chocolate cereal to kids back in 1997. I mean, it taught me how to get your message out there. And so we do a lot of press releases, we do videos, we do a lot of social media content, we host a lot of events, we talk to a lot of people. We just do kind of everything we can to help spread the word. Sit down with Nick and do a podcast 8:30 in the morning on a Monday. Anything we can do to let people know the work that's going on.
For sure. And this is the last question I always wrap up and ask everybody that I interview. If you could go back in time and give your 20-year-old self one piece of advice, what would you tell her and why?
Definitely put more money in your 401k. Start your 529 when your child is born. No, in all seriousness, well, those are serious, but my rule of thumb has always been to find what I like to do. And it's kind of like when you're in school, you always get A's in the classes you like the most, and then you struggle in the classes you don't. Work is the exact same way. Back to what you asked me in the beginning, you gotta grind in the beginning. You should not start a career and expect to be the CEO that day. You really have to put the time in, but by working really hard and putting the time in, you're gonna learn so much, and you are gonna learn what you like and what you don't like. And as long as you gravitate to the things that you like to do and you work really hard, opportunities are gonna present themselves. And really, when I look back on my career, I'm not a long-term planner. I did not graduate from college and say, I'm gonna work in advertising in New York, and then I think I'll get into renewable energy, and then I think I'll run a nonprofit. I mean, those thoughts never went through my head. I just focused on finding the things I found the most joy in doing, working really, really hard, and then opportunities, when they open themselves up, just take them. I think that's if I could go back in 20 years, is just keep your eyes open, work really hard. Don't worry about the grind in the beginning. It gets better once you have that experience, and just be ready for an opportunity when it presents itself.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming today.
Yeah.
Thank you all for tuning into episode 3. Make sure to share this with 1 or 2 people, either in the Tahoe area or anybody that you think may be interested in Amy's story. If you're watching on YouTube, please subscribe, please like, and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, please make sure to follow. Thank you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the next episode next week. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If you could just sit